Rich McCouch is a member of the Maryland province of the Society of Jesus. In the last few months, he has been settling into his new ministry post as the provincial assistant for pre-secondary and secondary education for the Maryland province. He lives at Arupe House, Jesuit community near St. Joseph's Preparatory in Philadelphia. A native of Philadelphia, Rich was graduated in 1976 from LaSalle College High School. Thereafter, he studied political science, history, and drama for his BA at Dickinson College. He was graduated from Fordham University with an MA in philosophy and then an MDiv from Weston Jesuit School of Theology in Cambridge, and studied for an MPhil at the Irish School of Ecumenics in Dublin. Entering the Jesuits in 1983, Rich has had an array of apostolic educational experiences. His ministry assignments have included 2 tours of duty at Scranton Preparatory School in Scranton, Pennsylvania, Sacred Heart Catholic Mission and Xavier High School, both in the South Pacific, where he also served as spiritual director of Jesuit scholastics in Micronesia. From 2004 until the last academic year, Rich ministered at Georgetown Preparatory School in Bethesda, Maryland, outside of Washington, where he served as a religious studies instructor, chaplain, and director of campus ministry, and rector of the Jesuit community there. In June 2008, Rich presented at our Campus Ministers Symposium that the historic Baltimore District sponsored. So we are happy to welcome Rich McCouch back to his native home, the LaSallian world. And we appreciate the time, and again, given your new post and settling into that new post, we know that your schedule is a busy one, but again, giving this time to assist us all in that mission of making the reign of God real and visible today. So welcome, Rich McCouch, SJ.
Thank you. First of all, Brother Ernest, for inviting me here. You know, my heart really does belong in the LaSalle schools, where I was raised for 4 years, and where I think I came to understand what education was truly all about. When I left LaSalle and discovered that the way with the brothers was not the only way in the world, I was kind of fascinated by all the different things that I did learn, but I never forgot my debt of gratitude to the brothers. I've been pleased that several of my nephews have attended LaSalle College High School in Philadelphia, and when I can, I try to engage with projects of the brothers, whether in Mexico City, at the Internado Infantil Guadalupano during the summers on occasion, up in New York City at the college there, or in other places where I happen to meet them. My first retreat was in 1975 in the fall. It was my senior. It was a good retreat. I think it was my first retreat, so it seemed to me like a very good one. It was a silent retreat for the most part. It was preached, and my most vivid memory was of the bell waking us up in the morning. When I look back and I try to articulate what it was that went on in the retreat, I find myself at a loss for words. I remember the bell because I was, I think by that time, used to hearing bells. I knew what a bell was. As for everything else that went on in the retreat, I had a really hard time articulating that. I didn't understand what was going on. It was a good retreat. I enjoyed the retreat, but I can't say that I really understood what was going on. Looking back, I can say that there were a number of things that came into play in the silence that I experienced and in the words that the brothers gave to us. I discovered later that this ability to articulate what it was that you experience. The Greeks refer to as phronesis, wisdom that's grounded in experience. But I didn't know that at the time. I wasn't paying attention to it at the time. I was thinking of the sort of things that any 17 or 18-year-old would be thinking of. And in the time since I was in high school, retreats have changed. Retreats have changed an awful lot. In that time since, I've conducted retreats for the past 24 years. I understand better now than where I began, and I think that the reason why I understand so much more is because I was told that I was responsible. And it wasn't just a matter of taking responsibility for a project, but rather taking responsibility for the students with whom I was working. And I found out early in the time that I was teaching that that can be a really scary thing. Once, I'd been maybe teaching 3 years at this point, and one of my students came to me at the end of the school year and asked if he could attend my last lecture with the freshmen. And I said, why would you want to do that? You're a junior. Oh, he said, and he started repeating, word for word, he started repeating one of my lectures. And I was really startled that students listen to what you're saying. And therefore, you have to be not only very careful about what you're saying, but you have to put a lot into what you're saying so that later on, they don't feel as though you've been blowing smoke at them or something like this. When I started working with retreats at Scranton Prep and then out in Micronesia, I was just following the sort of pattern that others had kind of established going before me. And it wasn't until really that I got to Georgetown Preparatory School and I discovered that there were a lot of different activities in competition with retreats, that I really started to process the experience not only of being on retreat, but of giving retreat in a different way. A retreat is a kind of formation, but it's a formation for transformation, a kind of changing of the heart, a changing of the mind, a changing of the activity, not only for the individual, but also for the class of which the individual is a part, and for the school of which the student is a member. For young men and women, it's a matter of their reflection and their action that becomes life-changing. For faculty, for administrators, for staffs, for boards of trustees, it's transformation because of the planning and the oversight that takes place. And for parents, it's transforming because it's a new way of supporting their young students. When you're at work in retreats, success with retreats can often work against you. Unless, and this is important, unless you can explain what you're doing. I've had the experience of coming back from a retreat and students running to embrace their parents. And the parents looking at their students a little oddly, wondering what happened that they're suddenly so affectionate. And then parents coming up to me either then or a week later saying something like, "What have you done to my son? What did you do with the guy I sent to you? What kind of magic were you working?" Well, it's not magic. But unless you can talk about the Spirit of God at work in a non-mysterious way, to speak about God's work in a rational language, in a language that has a way of being understood by the other faculty, by the administrators, by the board members, by the parents, unless you can explain this to them it will continue to be a mystery to them, and you can't get their full support unless they fully understand what it is that they're engaged with. So in this formation for transformation, there's 3 elements that I think are very, very important. The one involves the idea of curriculum. And I'll talk a good deal about that today. The second point is in terms of the context of retreat. And the third part is the coherence of the retreat. The first point in regard to curriculum. When you're trying to engage not only students who have many, many activities, and teachers who may be chaperones or co-workers or colleagues on the retreat, when you're trying to engage with administrators and board members, they can sometimes perceive the retreat, because it happens so incidentally during the course of the school year, they can perceive it as an extracurricular activity, like the school newspaper, play, soccer team. It's just something that you do incidentally. But it's very important and really key to getting the full cooperation and understanding of others is that you talk about retreats not as extracurricular, but as co-curricular. Now it seems like a simple prefix shouldn't make that much of a difference, but it does. When you talk about something that is co-curricular, you're talking about something that is essential to the mission of the school going forward. It is as essential to the school as what a student learns in math, or in English, or in anything else that's required at the very heart of what's going on. Curricula is a Latin word that means a course, where in the ancient Roman stadiums, they would run around the curricula. It's kind of a race. And the course that any school has is driven by its mission. And the more closely you can relate what you're doing on the retreat to the central mission of the school, the more teachers are going to buy into what you're trying to explain to them in terms of getting their participation, in terms of getting parental support, and in terms of getting administrative report. Why is this important? Because retreats compete in budgets, they compete in calendars, and in schedules, and in personnel. And you have to be able to justify the way in which you use your resources, not just your economic resources, but the way in which you use personnel, the way in which you take days out of the calendar, and the way in which you have an impact on the various schedules of the school. I was sitting maybe 2 years ago at a conference of chairs of departments, and the person running the meeting asked me to explain something about the retreats, because he said, let's face it, the retreats are the most intrusive part of the schedule. And this was a friend. He had chosen the wrong word. Retreats are the most intrusive part of the schedule. And I had to, swallow a little bit, catch my breath, and speak about the idea that these things, these retreats that we run, do not intrude. They are part of that which makes the curriculum what it is, part of how it is that we can live out our mission. So in terms of looking at your budgets, your calendars, your schedules, your personnel, and trying to justify your use of all of those to the administrators and your colleagues, you really have to think then about what a curriculum is. Now, at its very heart, in terms of what we're doing in a retreat, what is this course? The course is the relationship between an individual and God. That's the curriculum, the relationship between the individual and God. St. Paul in the letter to the first letter to the Thessalonians says, I pass along to you what was given to me. That on the night before he suffered, Jesus took bread and broke it and gave it to the other disciples. Paul is transmitting something of what went on. At the end of Matthew's Gospel, Jesus announces that the disciples, the apostles, should go out to all the world and teach the good news and baptize everyone in the name of the Father and of the Son and of the Holy Spirit. That's a curriculum. He's telling them what it is that needs to be repeated and transmitted, a kind of course in which the disciple becomes an apostle. Now, this relationship between God and the individual is mediated by so much. And the way in which we approach retreats can help retreats become a really good media for the support of the student's experience. But in all that you do, in all that we set up for our students, we have to remember that nothing should interfere in the relationship between God and the individual. It's the Spirit of God that directs each person on retreat. And as retreat designers, retreat leaders, retreat supporters, we have to try and not get in the way of the power of the Holy Spirit. One of our former generals, Peter Hans Kullenbach, in talking about what's essential to the care of a person, or cura personalis, that as you lead a person or guide a person through a retreat, the retreat for them should not be a bundle of your own ideas or a lot of what you say, so that there's no attention paid to what's bubbling up from the individual. And this is, in a sense, the genius of the silent retreat. If the retreat leader is not constantly talking, then there's that much more time for the retreatant to appreciate the silence and what's going on in the silence. The only difficulty is when we have students at the age that we have them, they're really not sure what silence is all about. And the more we're involved with the modern media that we have, the less able they are to appreciate the silence. You may find yourselves that when you go away on retreat with students and they're not allowed to take with them any of their little game machines or their little iPods or any of these other things, when they actually have to be in silence, some of them will say to you, I've never had this much silence before. Well, when I was a kid, silence was not unusual. You know, I'm one of 11 children, 5 brothers, 5 sisters. And so we had something of a noisy household, but even so, there were times of silence, especially when everybody had to go to bed at night. But when these guys and gals go to bed at night, they've got their phones with them, they've got their iPods with them, they've got their pads with them. Their media continues to infiltrate their world. And so we have to learn how to, in a sense, engineer the noise that's around them so that they can truly appreciate what's going on. Retreats can articulate, they can reflect and support the school mission, as I've said. And this is an opportunity then for the student also to articulate what's being received. You may find that when you ask alumni what was the most significant part of your time in high school, that some of them will say, oh, my senior retreat. that's the most important thing I did, or my junior retreat, or some particular time where it was only once, it only happened once during the course of the year, but it really shaped the way they thought about a lot of things. Now, retreats beyond the original message of Christ, they do have and they need to have a curriculum of their own if they're going to be perceived as an integrated part of the school's mission. And for most of our schools, no matter what our religious tradition, that curriculum needs to be better articulated. I didn't understand this for a long time. For many years, I was given retreats in an annual and said, okay, you're in charge of the retreat. And I would try and do my best to make sure that we were doing what was there. When I got to Georgetown Prep, and I was talking about the co-curricular nature of retreats, which I had thought about for many, many, many years, especially because of the competition of everything that you get from other places in the school. When I tried to get this point across to the headmaster, he said, well, if retreats are co-curricular, what is the curriculum? I said, I'll get back to you by the end of the week. And I went in with my two assistants who were working in the service program and in the retreat programs with me. And I said, you know what? I said, our central job for the rest of the year is to try and determine what the curriculum of these retreats are going to be, if we're going to be successful in promoting this idea of co-curricular activities. Well, they had just themselves graduated from college. They had no idea what I was talking about. But I knew that if I could convince them of it, it would be a start. My starting point was then a short article that I read by Mark K. Smith, a British author who works in youth development, and who talks about curriculum in a certain way. And I do have this article for you. I don't know if it's important to look at it now or whether you can look at it later. But it is, for me, it's a seminal article in terms of understanding precisely what it is when we talk about retreats following a particular kind of curriculum that's different from other kinds. Smith will go on to say in the article that there's basically 4 kinds of curriculum. And the first, he'll talk about curriculum that is transmittal. It's a transmission. And when we think of the liturgies or worship and prayer, you can see that there's a certain kind of transmission going on. That you are reading Gospels and other writings that have been transmitted for 2,000 years. That we're using prayers that have been transmitted for a long time. We're following a routine, we're passing on something that is grounded in the experience of the community that's very important. But for a retreat, it's essential that the experience of the student is not just this repetition, 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 because you'll find by the time that a student is in their late teenage years, they're tired of repeating prayers. They want something more, and they're hungry for something more. So there are 3 other kinds of curricula that Smith speaks about. One will be the product, curriculum as a product. And that is to say that when the student has finished this, he will have done this, and this, and this, and this. A student will be able to do this. A student will be able to do this. A student will be able to do this. Right? what you experience when you submit a budget for some project in the school, and you say it will cost X number of dollars to move this number of students this far in order to accomplish this. All right, this is curriculum as a product. We are trying to get something in particular. For retreats, we're looking at curriculum as a process. And maybe I should hand this out. More and more sense to you. I especially want to focus on where it talks about curriculum as a process, and that's on the flip side of the fourth page there, where it talks about curriculum as a process. What goes on in the life of each student on retreat is something which that student may not have experienced before. You may yourself have directed 20 retreats, but on any particular retreat with any particular student, this is something that has never happened before. And to be able to witness what is going on is a phenomenon. For those who've directed retreats, it's a phenomenon unlike anything else that I've experienced. And where I can see a genuine appreciation of what goes on is when I bring students who've been on the retreat back as leaders of a retreat, and they see the transformations going on in front of them, things that they had only felt before but now see happening. They're really astonished, and it's very much an individual experience. Here it will talk about the possibility of the subject who is being educated as a kind of experiment. Well, that's kind of dicey language a little bit. You don't want to tell the parents or the board that you're experimenting with the students. But what's going on is the idea that each time you take a student on retreat, there's a certain aspect of it that you know is going to repeat because you've witnessed God's work with students before. But it repeats in such a way that is also very unique to the individual person. In these areas here, I'll highlight a couple of things. On the 5th page, toward the bottom, under that gray box that says Stenhouse on curriculum. He's trying to draw a contrast between the product and the process model of curriculum. And whereas at the end of a workshop, you will have come out with, this is how we justify, when we're writing these workshops down, you will have come out with an understanding of this and this and this and this. But when a student comes out of a retreat, you don't know precisely what that student understands. You know that they'll understand a little bit differently than before, but they're going to understand things each in their own unique way. When you take one topic area, let's say you talk about God and nature, and if I asked each of you, based on your own experience, to talk about God and nature, you would come up with fairly unique appreciations because where you've been and what you've experienced. has been different. Even if you all went to the same place, the way in which you would take in what is around you and talk to others about what is around you, you would come out with something unique to your own experience. The second thing about the process is that you need to, or the retreat enables you to verify that what's been going on around you is real and not just pretend. Sometimes retreats can be very dramatic for some reasons. Sometimes retreats can be very athletic for certain reasons. Sometimes retreats can be just filled with movies. But at the heart of what the student's experience is, there needs to be something about it that is verifiable, that when they come back from the experience of the retreat, they don't think that their mind has been played with, or that something has been manipulated in their experience. So there has to be something that they come away with that's verifiable. If they come back and don't know just what has happened, they know that something that has happened, but they don't know exactly what has happened, this is not a bad thing. Outcomes should not be identical for every student. And the person that comes into a retreat should be the same person that comes out of a retreat. Students, when they're expressing their experiences, will sometimes say, oh, it made me very different, or I thought very different. But the reality is that if in the course of one day, or 2 days, or 4 days, students truly don't recognize who they are, right? There's probably a problem with that. So you're not looking for the kind of outcome where if you do 100 push-ups, you will be able to do this. But rather that if you're engaged in this particular activity, you're not looking for that an outcome-based experience, but you're looking for a way of the student themselves to understand and realize who they are just a little bit better. The students are not objects, and they don't belong to the retreat director. Sometimes retreat direction can get personality driven, and I think we've seen this kind of retreat. Retreats can become a little bit cultic sometimes. I think we've seen this at different times. And all we're doing is plugging the student in and pulling the student out at the end. But really, at the end of this experience, a student has to understand that when they come out of the retreat, they've got an enhanced understanding of who they are, and that it's not just, well, now I know how to add, or now I know how to pray, but rather instead that they come out thinking that they've got this relationship with God that they did not fully understand before, and that they're better able to articulate it. And the more that they engage in prayer or in some other kind of prayerful activity, the more they're going to be able to identify themselves. Now, this idea of curriculum as process, that is, of them working through these things with various guides, whether they are their peers or whether they're other teachers. This kind of process that takes place in a context. And that's the second thing I want to talk about, and I'll kind of loop back to the co-curricular nature in a bit. But I want to talk about the context of retreats. Within any school, your retreats take place within an academic program. Right? So what you're doing on retreat and what they're understanding on retreat should be verified by what's taking place in the classroom. If at the freshman year level the students are studying these three things, then there's something about the retreats and the way or the nature in which the students are being formed in the retreats that should be verified in their experience of the classroom as well. It shouldn't be dissociative or dissociated from the classroom experience. It should be in sync with that particular year's goals. In other words, what the campus minister is doing and what the religion teachers are doing should not be polar opposites. In our own tradition, we talk about the graduated graduation and what the goals are each year for a freshman, for a sophomore, for a junior, for a senior. What are the goals of each year? What's the profile going to be when they graduate? Well, in each retreat year, you should be able to verify that what you say is going on, not just at the level of the classroom, but on the retreat as well. So that's the first thing, that the context is such that you need to verify the retreat with what's going on in the class. And they shouldn't be that different from each other. Second point is this, that you're addressing the whole person in a retreat with a staff that is competent to address the whole person. Not just a scholar, not just an athlete, not just a performer, not just a writer, but a whole person. And students are, in my experience, students are starving to experience themselves as holistic. They address different pieces of things across the course of a school day, but to experience themselves as a whole person, an integrated person, this is something that a retreat can help them with. So the second part of the context is that it's holistic. The third piece is this, that whether you are dealing with scholars or athletes or performers or writers or whatever kind of student or the sort of things that students excel at, you want to get the support of all the departments of the school. It's not enough to get religion teachers on board. It's not enough to get any particular department on board. Others will want to participate if they understand what's going on. Others will not want to participate if they don't understand what's going on. And it's much easier to just let everything, leave everything up to the religion teachers if you don't engage them in that way. A retreat, contextually, should also be sequential. That what a retreat is doing should be in support of what has already been done and preparatory to what else needs to be done. So when you're thinking about the freshman as a student at the beginning of freshman year, should be in support of what they will be doing at the latter part of the freshman year. And what they're doing in sophomore year should build on what they've experienced as freshmen, and so forth through the rest of their time at school. It should be sequential. And the fifth and final context is that worship and service and all their other ways of reflection should form part of a whole. The way in which you worship at a school, the way in which you think about service activities and so forth, these should all be mutually supportive, and again, they should all be sequential according to particular goals for each grade, so that you've got an entire context. And when you are then talking about what the curriculum is that you're presenting, you can see how in this year you're doing this, in this year you're doing this, and this year you're doing this, and you should be able to explain it. And that brings me to my third point, that a retreat needs to be coherent. And your curriculum needs to be coherent. You have to be able to explain your retreat to your colleagues, whether they are faculty or administrators. You need to be able to explain your retreats to your parents and to the students. And during the course of a particular year, as a campus minister, a retreat director, there should be some time when you're meeting with parents to talk to them about retreats, when you're talking to the students, prefatory to their attending the retreat, what you're about to experience. There should be a time when someone related to campus ministry is speaking to the board, where you're speaking to chairs of other departments and so forth, so that they understand precisely what it is that you're doing and what you've got in mind. So it's not only coherent to your colleagues in these places, but it's also coherent at second point in its entirety. Where does this retreat come from? What is the history of this retreat? What is it that we're attempting to do? It should be coherent in all its parts. Every single exercise should be explainable. Everything that you do on a retreat, whether it is, you're leaving at 8 o'clock in the morning, you're getting on a bus, you're eating lunch, you're going to bed at a certain hour, you're doing this activity or that activity in small groups or in large groups, you should be able to explain all the exercises of the retreat in its parts. You should also be able to explain a retreat in each of its goals. Every goal should be explainable. And therefore, you should also be able to explain all of the effects of what happens on a particular retreat. You can't design retreats or add pieces to retreats just because this would be cool to do that. When I got to Georgetown Prep 8 years ago, for part of their Kairos retreat, the leaders had taken at a certain part of the night to hiding behind trees with flashlights and kids running from tree to tree, learning a new part, a new secret. Right? Well, when I saw that, I thought, what is this? Well, it's really cool. Well, it might be really cool, but it's really late, and the kids are really tired. And if you're just running them around without a purpose other than that it's cool, you're not really going to accomplish overall what you're hoping to. I had thought on a particular retreat with seniors, I had thought it would be cool if we all had horses and we could all ride together too. But thank goodness it's so expensive that you can't do something. You can't just rationalize everything because it seems like it might be neat or cool. If we don't understand what we're doing, we're going to be misunderstood. We're going to be misunderstood with two effects, and both of them are bad. Both of these are bad effects of a retreat. Someone along the road will say that you're manipulating the students, that you are depriving them of sleep, and then getting to your goal because they're sleep deprived, or because there's some kind of cult of personality going on. And with each of these, what happens is when the retreatant walks away from it after a week or two, because they're not stupid, because we educate them to be critical thinkers, after a week or two, they're going to figure out that they've been had. And so you can't, or we can't open ourselves up to doing things just because it's a neat thing to do. And it produces a certain kind of effect. The second is this, that if we can't improve what we do or change what we do, we're not open to transformation ourselves. And that's a critical problem also. If you come into a school and they have this retreat, and the retreat always runs this way, and it's been running that way for 20 years, and no one wants to change anything about the retreat, there's something wrong with that retreat. There's something wrong, because the students that have been coming in over the course of 20 years are socially different. Their whole context is different. The context of the teachers who are attending the retreat are going to be different. So you have to be able to transform yourself. You have to be able to let go of things. When I left Georgetown Prep at the start of this year, I got a call about halfway through September saying that they had changed the freshman retreat. And they thought I'd be very upset. I said, well, good, good. Then they've got a retreat director who's thinking about what's going on. You can't just do the same thing all the time. I want to show you what this looks like. All right, I've been talking about this. Yes? I
have one question.
Sure.
Am I hearing you correctly that you're saying that we should be preparing students before these are the things that you're going to be doing to the point of this is the activity, this is what we're hoping to get? Because I know that Kairos, particularly, is not supposed to be discussed before you get there as part of its power. And that if I do explain to you what we're going to be doing hour by hour, that there will be too much. You know, what's that balance?
How much information do they need?
Right.
And Kairos is one of these retreats where, you know, you're not trying to withhold information from them because it's a secret. You withhold certain information from them because to think about it would become obsessive for them. Let me give as an example these letters that we received, Palanca letters. Called Palanca because they're supposed to act as levers for the heart. They're supposed to move the heart. If any student, I don't care who they are, if any student knew that they were going to receive a letter from their parent and that this letter might be read out loud, for 2 days they'd be obsessing about what did she write? What did he write? Right? So it's not a matter of keeping a secret so much as it is keeping certain parts confidential. But what can you do with the Kairos retreat in particular? You can talk about the nature of the exercises. Well, we're going to go up to this place and we're going to be together for 4 days. And 8 of your peers are going to talk to you. And they're going to talk to you about things that have had an impact on them. So you can talk about things to that extent. When they're younger, sometimes the more explicit you can be, the more helpful it is for them not to be afraid of what they're getting into. So, you know, in one particular retreat that I'll show you, we're just going on a 10-mile hike. And we're going to stop along the way, and we're going to do these things. There's nothing for them to obsess about. We're just open that to them. But it's a very good point. There's a point at which, with some retreats, where you don't want to give them so much information that they can't act. And that's precisely what would happen if they read the manual for the Kairos retreat. For Ignatius, when a person was making the 30-day retreat, they weren't given the manual. This is really a big manual. If you just read the manual, you'd be bored to death. He wasn't all that good a writer in a certain sense, that it's not great reading. But for the guide to be able to refer to it and to be able to walk with the person on the retreat, checking certain points along the way, discarding this, adding that, this is a very helpful thing. So when I say that there needs to be a certain amount of pre-lection, it varies year by year what's appropriate to the grade, until if you do your Kairos retreat in your junior year, then whatever you do in your senior year, there should be a certain explainability about it, that they've mastered, that they know what it means to obsess over something and you're not going to do it. Right? You say, well, this is the part of the retreat. Come look at the manual. Come ahead. And they'll say, no, never mind. So identifying that those things which you want to keep confidential is, I guess, an important part. But otherwise, most of the things that go on in the retreat, just pretty normal things. You tell them from the very beginning, when they go up there, there's not going to be any lightning bolts. Nothing's going to fall off the horse. It's just the things that they experience in the course of their relationship with each other that's going to be astonishing. What's truly astonishing in some of these retreats is how students speak to each other and open up with each other. And as a teacher or a faculty member, you look at them and you say, how could you not know about this? He's your best friend. How did you not know that? I've known that for years. But they don't. They don't know that. This is a brochure which we share with parents and with teachers and with board members. When we talk about retreats, or whether we talk about service programs or liturgies, that they can understand what we're talking about. So it begins talking about retreats as being a proposal for action and conversations out of which may come some critical thinking and some action. That in this retreat cycle that they're experiencing, they're going to have a context in which they desire openness and testing spirituality and fostering spirituality. We give a brief history of the retreat at the school, what the objectives are for the retreat, and then year by year, on the inside, we try to identify what needs to be done in advance, what the retreat experience incorporates, and what the student will be able to witness when they're done. You'll notice that in the sections on prelection, and I think this is very important in light of the curriculum that's come to us from the Bishops' Conference, and I think you're talking about it at some point later in this series. It's good to be able to ground what you're doing, not just in your own experience of God and trying to guide others along in their way of experience too, but if you can contextualize it in terms of what we're being asked to do. If you remember, I said that contextually we should be able to verify academically what's going on in the course of the retreat as well. So in the freshman year, as an example, you'll see that under prelection, if you go to the catechism, under these particular sections, it will talk about certain ideas. And again, because these work out of Ignatian schools, that it incorporates the spiritual exercises of Ignatius in its different parts. But for yourselves, you should be able to, at the very beginning, when you're dealing with freshmen, such that by the time they're seniors, they should be old hag, for them, the very first thing that we should be identifying in retreats for them are helping them to understand their own desires in terms of who God is, their ways of coming to know who God is, how we come to know who God is in the context of the church, and how we speak about God. Now, you're not going to sit down with them and recite these aspects of the catechism, but from time to time, you might be called upon to explain what it is that you're trying to do. So if you can reference the catechism in different parts, this is a good thing for you, and it will build support for you in what you're doing. In our own apprehension of retreats for Jesuit schools, in the Jesuit tradition, if we can't find what's going on in the retreat in the first principle and foundation, if there's something going on in the retreat that does not happen there, the retreat director in one of our schools would need to be very suspicious of what's going on there. Well, not suspicious, but at least wary of what's going on. What is it you're really trying to do? In your own tradition, in the LaSalle schools, I've got these two excerpts. One where LaSalle talks about what the curriculum is all about. For instance, he talks about simultaneous method in the curriculum. When you're developing your retreats, is there anything that you can identify in terms of what you're doing that is rooted in the tradition of what LaSalle is looking at in terms of curriculum? Do we reinforce the idea that in LaSalle school retreats that the central position of God, the experience of God in the retreat, the central position of that is essential to any retreat that a young person would be on? If you look at this one quote from LaSalle at the end, it says, although we can't be certain as long as we live on this earth whether we possess true love for God, there are various signs that to some extent can give us some assurance. The first sign is when we ardently desire to do the will of God in all things. The second is when we fulfill exactly what we know God demands of us. Well, if you read over in what Ignatius is saying, it's not so very different. And all of the saints and mystics who, from Anthony on, talk about leading souls on a particular course, you recognize the same fundamental aspects over and over and over again. That the experience of God is central to what's going on, and that there should be nothing that intrudes in the way in which a person takes that in. That is, a director or a team should not be so overbearing in what they're doing that the retreat can't articulate what just happened. They should have some ability to think through that. If you go back to your own experience of learning, whether it was when you were first learning how to read or first learning how to add, your best teachers were helping you get the concept, but they weren't just forcing you to do it. There was something going on in the course of your mind and you could explain what was going on. And you really want, as a goal, you really want people to be able to articulate themselves what's going on. So that from the start of the course, if you're dealing with high school students, from freshman year to senior year, or if you're dealing with middle school students from 6th to 8th or to the 9th grade, there should be a deliberate sequencing of activities and goals that appreciate the context of each of the students, that is coherent, and which does not interfere with the relationship that each of the persons is developing with God. They're not developing a relationship with you as the retreat director. They're developing a relationship with God. And everything else has to stay out of the way. Ignatius has a term, a Latin term, tantum quantum, which is a phrase that means insofar as. And if you look at the principle and foundation, in the third sentence, it tells us that we're created to praise, reverence, and serve God, that everything else is created for us. Okay, and then he says, from this it follows that we are to use them as much as they help us, and ought to rid ourselves of them so far as they hinder us. Insofar as, tantum quantum, insofar as it helps, insofar as it hinders, We do this or we don't do this. There are no magical words. There are no magical retreats. But the way in which we order things as a process of opening the student up to that experience of God. This is what's essential.